Sony's PlayStation 2 still holds the crown for being the best-selling video games console. There is no denying the impact and success this absolute beast of a console had during its 13-year production run. From DVD playback to backwards compatibility, for those that grew up with it, and for those that are discovering it for the first time today, there is so much to explore on Sony's second home console. It is infamous for being difficult to develop for, and much of that has translated into the world of emulation. However, we are finally entering a point in time that devices small enough have the power to emulate this iconic console. Join me, the Retro Tech Dad, as I begin the journey of examining emulation in depth on the GPD XP Plus and what it means for PlayStation 2 gaming on the go. Now, my viewers might recall that I did something similar for the Win600 when I examined PS2 emulation on that handheld. However, I selected games that were exclusive with a mixture of personal favorites and overlooked gems. This time around, I thought it would be interesting to go down the list of the best-selling PS2 games from Wikipedia and see how the GPD XP Plus can handle it. For the sake of simplicity and consistency, all the games featured in this video were tested in the impressive AetherSX2 running at 1.25x resolution with performance mode turned on using the Vulkan API. There may be games on this list that can run at a higher resolution, and there will be some games that I chose to omit. These were mostly yearly Madden releases and games that just wouldn't make much sense to emulate here, such as the Guitar Hero or iToy games. But enough of this, let's get right into the games. As always, I like to let you know right up front what didn't work in my testing. Amazingly, the only game that had very poor performance in Vulkan, OpenGL, and software mode was Hotshots Golf 3, or also known as Everybody's Golf 3. I consulted the AetherSX2 compatibility list, and it does appear that this one has issues running even on something like the Snapdragon 888. Regardless, this is amazing given that I tested 50 of the best-selling games on PS2 and only one was truly unplayable. AetherSX2 is very impressive. Okay, so starting from the bottom of the bestsellers list comes Capcom's first entry in the Devil May Cry franchise with 2.16 million copies sold. I am running the PAL version here because I found a readily available Ultrawide patch for that specific version. As you can see, it has no issue staying at 50 frames per second and probably can go higher resolution than what is shown here. Next is the fourth installment in the Ratchet & Clank series known as Deadlocked. This one had a little bit darker tone than the usual Ratchet & Clank games, but is still very enjoyable for fans of the series. It's not my personal favorite in the franchise. The game does run nice and smooth and overall stays at a 60 frames per second.
Hold R2 or triangle and use the left analog stick to select any weapon.
Next up is the second entry in one of my favorite online games from the PS2 era. I had a little bit of an addiction to the SOCOM games, and true story, I think I played about 5 minutes of the single player in all of the games in the franchise. It was all about the online play for me. Being part of clans, having voice chat, it was all a big deal at the time, especially on the PS2. This one is actually one of the worst performing playable games on the list despite trying different APIs and settings. It has weird slowdowns at times, but it's not the worst experience. I promise, it does get better from here, and I also have an ultra-wide patch applied for this game.
Acquired a target, sir. We've got company.
The Simpsons Road Rage is a straight clone of Crazy Taxi, but with the Simpsons characters and universe. It's not a terrible game, just horribly uninspired, and for me, not the Simpsons game I think of when you mention 6th generation consoles. This one is pretty much flawless, running at a nice and smooth 60 frames per second.
Perhaps we can do business in the future.
Seatbelt. Take me to Seymour's house. If anyone asks, just tell them we're marking tests.
Whatever.
One of the earlier entries in this very long-running franchise, Dynasty Warriors had a good amount of success on the PS2, and I always enjoy these hack-and-slash outings when I want something fun to relax with. The iconic bad voice acting and history lessons are all included here. It runs pretty well here on the XP Plus. I absolutely adore this entry in the Resident Evil franchise, and the PS2 version would be the second time I ended up playing the game, first being on the GameCube of course. The game holds up really well today and is still such a blast to revisit. Performance is excellent here on the XP Plus and can probably handle a higher resolution. A return to form for many in this franchise after following up the disappointing Devil May Cry 2. The Devil May Cry games are such a blast, and this one features a younger Dante to play as. This one needed to run under OpenGL to be a very nice and smooth experience. I much prefer when Battlefront was in the hands of Pandemic Studios, and I was eagerly awaiting the sequel. I had so much fun playing this one online back in the day, and the single player options are still fun to mess around in. This is another game that has no issues running. The third entry in the massively successful Tony Hawk Pro Skater franchise. The franchise was just killing it at this point, and it has the title of being the highest rated game for the PS2 on Metacritic alongside GTA 3. I hope Activision gives us what we all want and does a Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 and 4 remaster. It's another game that runs great on the XP Plus. And another Tony Hawk game on the best-selling list, which comes as no surprise, Tony Hawk's Underground, or Thug, is when the series really tried to change up the formula and keep things fresh. Now, I really love Thug. It's just so much fun and goofy, and the skating is still as solid as ever. I think the Tony Hawk games were all in top form during the 6th generation of consoles, and like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, this one runs very well on the XP Plus. You know, it's wild. I think this is the first time I'm featuring a Sonic game on my channel. The crazy thing is, I absolutely love Sonic the Hedgehog. I freaking have the Lego set. That's how much of a fan I am of the character. Now, Sonic Unleashed had the honor of following up Sonic 2006, so most were optimistic that it couldn't get much worse, right? Well, Sonic Unleashed certainly is a better game, but many were still divided on it, with many hating the werehog elements, but this one is actually one of the better modern Sonic games. If you recall from my Win 600 PS2 video, this one was a poor performer, and I'm really glad to see that this one is running so well here on the XP Plus. Tekken Tag was a launch game for the PS2 and one of the earliest games for the console. Despite this, it made excellent use of the PS2's processing power. The very first in this type of LEGO game, and I remember when this one launched and word started to get out that it was actually a really good and fun game, especially for multiplayer. Despite being the first one, it's filled with a decent amount of content and the gameplay is still very solid. The game also cleans up nicely in emulation and runs great. I gotta give it to EA, they were publishing some solid license-based games during this time, and The Lord of the Rings The Two Towers was no exception. This is a very solid hack-and-slash type game which is an adaptation of the first movie and the second. And I'm starting to sound very repetitive, but yeah, this one runs great with an ultra-wide patch applied here. Another Dynasty Warriors game on this list, and outperforming its predecessor in sales, I'd say that the Dynasty Warriors franchise was really at its most popular point on the PS2. Surprisingly, this one runs slightly better than 3, but performance is still very good overall. Remember when Medal of Honor was the go-to World War II first-person shooter franchise? This is the follow-up to Medal of Honor Frontline and takes place in the Pacific campaign of World War II, featuring many of the signature elements of Medal of Honor like impeccable set design and immersive atmosphere. I personally like this entry despite it getting mixed reviews, and I think the Medal of Honor franchise never could gain back its popularity after this one. The game runs mostly well with some occasional dips in frame rate, but probably would be perfect at 1x resolution.
Need for Speed Most Wanted. Make sure you do all your racing in the game. On the streets, drive safely and responsibly, and wear your seatbelt.
Thank you, Josie, for that very important message. Before Criterion took over the Need for Speed series, Black Box was absolutely killing it with the Need for Speed franchise. Now, I actually purchased Most Wanted alongside my Xbox 360 at launch, and enjoyed the upgraded visuals over there. This is a fantastic Need for Speed game that blends cheesy live-action cutscenes with CG to make it look sort of in-game. I will say that this game gets hard as balls later on, and I absolutely cheesed it to beat some of the requirements. The game is running pretty well here on the XP Plus. Alright, now we're talking. This is definitely the Simpsons game that I love from the 6th generation, and it's obvious many feel the same way about it. This is basically a GTA clone featuring the Simpsons, and it's just such a blast to play. I'd love to see the Simpsons make a return like this, but yeah, it's probably never happening. It runs and looks beautiful here on the XP Plus. Okay, I have to admit that I have never played any of the Budokai games, and I will probably disappoint some, but Dragon Ball Z is an anime series that I don't really watch. I much prefer anime like Cowboy Bebop, Samurai Champloo, and Full Metal Alchemist. Regardless, this is on the bestsellers list, and I am testing these games to see how they run. I am happy to say that this is another game that performs without issue here. I think Ace Combat 4 was probably peak Ace Combat for me and for the franchise in general. This is an awesome arcade-style combat flight game with a full-blown story mode, and of course, no issues running the game here. This is actually the first Crash Bandicoot game not released exclusively for the PlayStation. I actually really like this game. Yeah, it's not all that innovative or exciting, but I think Traveler's Tales did a good job with it. I guess we can consider this Crash 4 until we got the actual Crash 4 all these years later. This is one that gets tested a lot with PS2 emulation, and the XP Plus has absolutely no issue running it. The first in the SOCOM franchise, and the first game to make use of the PS2 headset, which featured online play with voice chat and speech recognition for the offline modes. As I talked about earlier with SOCOM 2, it was all about online play for me, and this game was an addiction for sure. I wish Sony would properly bring this franchise back in some capacity, but I don't think it will ever happen. This one runs a lot better than SOCOM 2 in emulation, and I also have an ultrawide patch applied here. Not the first licensed game in the list, but I remember 2002 all too well when the first Spider-Man movie came out with Tobey Maguire and Willem Dafoe. I actually really enjoyed this game and thought it was a solid game based on a licensed property. Now Spider-Man 2 would take the game to a whole new level. I think the first still has its charms. The swinging mechanic is very solid, the game features voice acting from Tobey Maguire, Willem Dafoe, and Bruce Campbell. I mean, what's not to like? It's just good Spidey fun and it runs very well. Basically becoming a yearly release, I always thought Yuki's did a good job with the WWE franchise during this time. Smackdown vs. Raw 2006 does a good job capturing the excitement of WWE wrestling and runs pretty decently here with some slowdown during certain shots in the intros and during finishers. Overall, it's still very smooth and playable. I'm really quite pleased with how popular Ratchet and Clank games were on the PS2. As I said, I absolutely adore this franchise, and Going Commando is the second in this series, and the first to feature those funny subtitles. Like Deadlocked, this one has no issues running. The third entry in the Budokai Tenkaichi series, which is separate from the Budokai series. These games were developed by Spike and not Dimps. Just like Budokai, this one is a fighting game and also runs great on the XP Plus. Now, I remember the hype leading up to this game. This was supposed to be a groundbreaking GTA clone that was going to be exclusive to the PS2. It had extremely high production values, and most have probably forgotten it by now. But I really loved this game when it came out. It did a lot of very interesting things in terms of gameplay mechanics, like cleverly using turn signals on the automobiles to indicate to the player when to make a turn. The game is obviously inspired by films like Snatch and just has so much style. The music, voice acting, and graphics are all top-notch here and are technical achievements on the PS2. I am not surprised that this is a tough one to emulate. This one required me to do some specific tweaks to get it running, as you see here, using native resolution, OpenGL, high blending accuracy, and disabling instant VU1. Despite all of that, it's still not perfect, particularly during cutscenes which get very rough. However, I'm just glad it runs at all. Go check this one out. I think it's a severely overlooked game on PS2. These are such fantastic games on the PS2, and there are a few of these on the bestsellers list. However, I opted to represent one game here, and this is actually the newest of the games in the top 50 or so. Pro Evolution Soccer 4, or Winning 11-8 International, is the very loved football game from Konami during a time when they actually made good games and cared. As you can see, this game has no issues running on the XP Plus, and is such a joy to play. It's still lots of fun. Ratchet and Clank is back not only with their fantastic wordplay, but with the iconic elements that we have all come to know and love. This is the third entry in the franchise and also the third Ratchet and Clank game on this list. Again, I am very pleased with just how popular this franchise ended up being on the PlayStation 2. Like the other ones, this one has no issues running.
There's too many of them! We're all gonna die!
Press circle to fire your shock blaster.
This game was a big deal when it launched, being backed by a very large budget, and like Rising Sun, takes place during World War II as well, but focused on the events in Germany. Medal of Honor Frontline has an absolutely tremendous soundtrack, and is probably most known for its portrayal of D-Day in the opening segment, which at the time was a technical achievement. This one has some small dips, but overall is very playable using the OpenGL API instead of Vulkan, and will probably run perfect at native resolution. I do have an ultrawide patch applied for this game using the PAL version. By the way, I'll have all the available ultrawide patches down in the description box below. I think Need for Speed Underground is one of my favorite entries in the franchise, and one I have desperately wanted EA to revisit and remaster. I've always loved the slick visuals in this one, and the racing, customization, and soundtrack are all awesome. It's just a fun, pure racing game. It also has the honor of being the best-selling Need for Speed game on the PlayStation 2. Black Box really did such a great job with Need for Speed. I have this game running the PAL version because I have an ultrawide patch for it, and it runs and looks great. The first entry in the series and the best-selling one. However, I must say that this series was very much a consistent one, and the fact that 4 entries made this list tells you everything. The game, like all the others, has no issues running. Now we're getting to some heavy hitters and very notable franchises. This is not the first time that Metal Gear Solid makes an appearance on the PlayStation 2, but this one was obviously a big seller and very popular. In this one, we go back to the 1960s, well before the other Metal Gear games. This one is consistently considered one of the best games of all time. It has been re-released on PlayStation 3, PS Vita, Xbox 360, and even received a 3DS version. I had to run this one in OpenGL, and unfortunately the cutscenes are really poor performing, but the gameplay doesn't seem to have any issues. Moving on from the Crash Bandicoot games, Naughty Dog's first game on the PS2 was also a new franchise for them, and a quite successful one at that. Surprisingly, no other Jak game made the list in the top 50 or so bestsellers for PS2. However, this one is such a classic and has held up very well. Just recently, a native PC port was created for this game, which I thought was kinda cool. The game runs great here for those wanting to play it on the go, but don't forget, it did receive a port to the PS Vita. Another heavy hitter for the PlayStation 2 and PlayStation brand as a whole. God of War 2 was the follow-up to the immensely successful original. The God of War games always serve as a benchmark for PS2 emulation, and I am happy to report it runs very well here. I have the game using an ultra-wide patch for the PAL version, and there are no issues. Right ahead of the sequel is the original edging it out in sales. To many, God of War is one of the must-play games of the PS2 generation, and its sales numbers are no surprise. It has been re-released both on Vita and PS3. This is another benchmark game, and like the sequel, runs very well. It's amazing how many iconic franchises started out on the PlayStation 2. It was really a golden age of gaming. Another sequel and another popular series. For those unaware, Kingdom Hearts 2 is an RPG created by Square using Disney properties such as characters and settings from their films. It's no surprise that this brilliant combination of the two resulted in such a big response. I am happy to say that the game runs very well here. Another RPG on the bestsellers list, and crafted by the RPG geniuses at Level 5, Dragon Quest VIII is another entry in the very long-running series. One of the best things that happened was giving the reins over to Level 5 and letting them work their magic. I'm not surprised to see this entry on the list, as it was a massive success both commercially and critically, with many believing it to be one of the best games ever. The fantastic art style really cleans up nicely with emulation, and is another game that is just running great. Okay, I think many didn't know what to expect here, which is probably why it's sold tremendously well, being the sequel to Final Fantasy X and a first for the Final Fantasy series, which was the continuation of a mainline Final Fantasy game. For me, this is a guilty pleasure. I loved it, and I played it through completion. Fun note, this was actually the last Final Fantasy game released by Square before they merged with Enix to become Square Enix. And to no surprise, this game runs great on the XP Plus. Alright, so we have now officially entered the top 10 best-selling games according to Wikipedia. Starting with number 10, and the first game in the Kingdom Hearts franchise. As I mentioned earlier, it's no surprise that the combination of the RPG masters from Square with the iconic characters and worlds of Disney would result in such a commercial success. I'm using a PAL version here because I have an ultra-wide patch running for the game, and no surprise, this one runs great. Final Fantasy was definitely a series that had really quality representation on the PlayStation 2. Coming in at number 9, Final Fantasy XII was a really cool entry in the long-running franchise with some very unique elements never before seen in a Final Fantasy game. Final Fantasy XII also received a sequel, but oddly for the Nintendo DS. This game has been re-released quite a bit and is on lots of platforms today. For the XP Plus, this one runs great. It's very cool to see a fighting game make the top 10 list, and coming in at number 8, there's no denying that Tekken 5 was an absolute banger of a game. This game actually marked the 10th anniversary of the Tekken franchise. For many, this was a return to form for the series after Tekken 4. The game is running great here on the XP Plus, and I'm using the PAL version with an ultra-wide patch, and it is just beautiful. Yes! Finally, we have made it to Metal Gear Solid 2. I remember being so incredibly hyped to play this game. As much as I enjoy Zone of the Enders, how many people do you think bought that game just to get access to the demo disc of Metal Gear Solid 2? I must have replayed that disc 100 times when I was younger. Anyways, this was a big deal for PlayStation 2 and Sony, and it was the sequel to one of the most iconic PlayStation 1 games, being Metal Gear Solid. The fact that this comes in at the number 7 bestseller tells you just how strong the PS2 library is, because this is easily one of the greatest on PlayStation 2. And like nearly every game on this list, it runs very well on the XP Plus. This one is definitely a big deal and pretty much made the PS2 the must-buy console in 2001, which, mind you, was the same year that had Metal Gear Solid 2, Final Fantasy X, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, and Gran Turismo 3 all on the PS2. Seriously, the PlayStation 2 was an absolute beast. It's no wonder why nobody could compete against them. Now, GTA 3 was the first time the series transitioned to a fully 3D world, and it was just a massive success for the franchise. This one really was a game changer for the industry and would usher in countless clones. I'm really happy to say that this one runs great and looks great on the XP Plus. To many, this is the greatest Final Fantasy game ever made, maybe only being bested by Final Fantasy VII, depending on who you ask. My longtime friend will be very happy that I finally have included this game in one of my videos, as it's one of his personal favorites. It's really amazing to see it running so well here on a device like the XP Plus in ultrawide, considering that I remember the same friend trying out the early days of PCSX2 emulation on a compact laptop and actually having pretty good success emulating Final Fantasy X. It doesn't surprise me that this game has made it to the number 5 on the bestsellers list, and to this day is one of the most iconic games released in the Final Fantasy franchise. Coming in at number 4 with over 11 million copies sold, it really makes you appreciate just how big of a deal the Gran Turismo series is for PlayStation. Gran Turismo 4 was the follow-up to the enormous success of Gran Turismo 3, and really for many, including myself, is the best Gran Turismo game in the franchise. In fact, as I've said in a different video, the Gran Turismo series was in top form on the PS2. And like before, I'm repping my current home state of Arizona and also throwing in the city track of the place I was born and raised, being New York City. I've got GT4 running here in the PAL version with ultra-wide, and man, it looks so good. With no surprise, coming in number 3 and edging out Gran Turismo 4 with almost 15 million copies sold comes its predecessor, Gran Turismo 3. Now this one was a big deal because the graphical fidelity boost coming from PS1 to PS2 was really evident with this game. This is one of the finest racing games ever crafted, and I'm actually including footage from one of my favorite tracks, with the gorgeous sun rays beaming through the trees and onto the road. I was simply blown away by the graphics of this game at the time, and through the power of emulation, it still looks amazing and runs great. My personal favorite of the 6th generation Grand Theft Auto games, since I absolutely adore the 80s aesthetic, music, and world. Grand Theft Auto Vice City amazingly more than doubled the sales of GTA 3 and was an even bigger hit than that one. Building on much of what made GTA 3 so great with a brand new city to explore, I think many, like me, really love the 80s theme. I love revisiting this one here and there because it's just such a great game that has held up very well and plays well in emulation. Finally made it to the number 1 best-selling game on the PlayStation 2, and probably comes as no surprise to many. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas was only following up to the already incredible success of Vice City and GTA 3. Except I don't think many thought that this one would end up becoming the best-selling game on the PlayStation 2, with over 17 million copies sold. It may not be an exclusive to the PS2 and has been ported to so many different platforms at this point, but there's no denying how much of a big deal this game was when it released for PlayStation 2. In fact, the Guinness World Records lists this as the most successful PS2 game. And so, if you made it to the end of this video, I salute you, comrade. Thank you for taking this journey with me and exploring the PS2 bestsellers list running on the XP Plus. I have to say that at this point, the XP Plus might be one of the best ways to play PS2 games on the go. AetherSX2 has fantastic compatibility, and the XP Plus has enough power and an amazing battery life to make PS2 handheld gaming a reality. For me, this makes the XP Plus one of my favorite retro handheld devices in my collection currently. Stay tuned, because more PS2 will be returning, but this time on a different device. As always, please comment down below and let me know what you think, or share some of your memories with the games featured on this list. This is the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.